apologize in advance if I sound um, like a zombie. I'm a bit under the weather with the flu, so please just bear with me. But if you can't hear me, or if you need me to repeat anything, please do let me know. So yeah, let's start. Okay, so today I'm going to explain the index numbers. Okay, so that is learning unit 2. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Just let me know once you can see this whiteboard. There's a table here with toiletry items on the left, and then base year, current year, going across the columns. If you can't see that, just give me a heads up. Then continue. Fantastic. All right, let's get back to it. Okay, so index numbers are it's pretty much looking at how quantities and prices have changed over time for specific goods. It can also be for services as well, but most often it's for goods. And in this example, it's goods, it's toiletry items in specifically. So if you look at the left column, what you'll see there's 3 toiletry items: soap, deodorant, and toothpaste. And this is what will be given to you. All right, so I know it's a lot of information on this table, but I'm going to go through all of it. All right, so from here, let's say from here to here is the information that will be given to you. All right, you won't be given the information on the right, so the calculated columns. This you will have to do on your side. All right. So you're given this information that I've bracketed in blue. You're given the prices for toiletry items in the base year, and that's what this P naught is. Okay, so P naught is the price for items in the base year. So that's the price of soap, which is 195 in 2010, etc. And then the quantity for soap in 2010. So for soap it is 37, for deodorant it is 24, etc. Then you have the current year here. And the current year, the price is indicated by P1. So those subscripts, those numbers next to the letters, they indicate which time period. So when it's a 1, it's the current year. And when it's a 0, it's the base year. All right, so keep that in mind. All right, so you have the prices in the current year for soap, and you have the quantity for toiletry items in the current year, which is 2018. All right. So yeah, I know this is a bit of an old example, but the principle still applies. So we're talking about 2018. All right. Okay. So what you should do as a first step is calculate these totals. All right. So see this column here and this row here. All you need to do from your side is total everything. So what I'm saying is look at the P naught column, add up all the prices. So 1.95 plus 14.65 plus 6.29. If you add it up, you'll get this here. All right. And you do the same for the other columns. All right. Up to here and here. All right. So I'm going to ignore the columns on the right. Okay. So let's ignore all the columns on the right of this for now. We'll come back to it. Okay. So what you need to understand is that you get unweighted indices and then you get weighted indices. All it is when it's unweighted, that means you look at either price or quantity on its own. You don't look at them together. But when it's weighted, then you look at both price and quantity together. All right, so let me explain that with an example. So let's talk about the unweighted price index. Okay, it's also called the price relative. So say the question asks you to work out what is the price relative for toothpaste. Okay, so the question is price relative, work out the price relative for toothpaste. For tooth. Oops. All right, so let's work this out. So let's look at toothpaste, which is here. Now they ask us for the price relative. So let's look at how the price has changed from the earlier period, which is 2010, to the current period. So what you would always have is you'd have the base period in the bottom. You have the base period here, and you'll have the current period on the numerator. So the price for toothpaste, okay, in the current year is 6.74, right, or 6.74, 6.74, and then the price for toothpaste in the base year, which is 2010, is 6.29. All right. So you will divide these two, and then you will multiply by 100%. All right, and you will get a value of, I believe you'll get a value of 107.15%. 107.15%. All right. So you don't have to memorize this formula, what I've done here, because you can see this is given to you. All the formulas that you see in this block on the right, they're all given to you. So I don't expect you to memorize that. You just need to understand how to use it. All right. So now that you've worked out the price relative for toothpaste, you need to explain the result that you got. Now, how I recommend you do this is whenever you work out the index, you need to work out the change. Okay, so how much has it changed going from the base year to the current year? And a simple method to do that is just subtract 100% from it. All right, so it'll be 107. The change is going to be 107.15% minus 100%, and that is simply 7.15%. Okay, that's 7.15%. So because it's a positive value, and for some of you intuitively you can see that it's increased, okay, because in what it's saying is that it's greater than 100, so the price for toothpaste has increased, right? So how you'd interpret this in words is you would say from the base year, and you always need to specify the base year. So in our case, you would say 2010. Don't say base year, okay? That's a tip for you. So say from 2010 to 2018, the price of toothpaste right, has increased by 7.15%. So you would write this here. Yeah. That's how you would interpret this. Okay, it's very important that you interpret the result because you get marked for that. Okay, so make sure you understand that. Now, I know I recommended subtracting 100%. Some of you will choose not to do this because you might just see it or do a shortcut and figure it out. The reason why I say subtract 100 because you can't be guaranteed that the value is always going to be more than 100. There's going to be cases where the value is less than 100. So to see that difference or the decrease isn't straightforward for most people, but it's up to you. All right, but I recommend doing this method. Always, whatever results you get, you subtract 100% from it and then interpret the results. If it's a negative, it means it's decreased. If it's a positive value, as it is here, that means it's increased. All right, and you need to interpret it like this. All right, so that's the price relative. So I'll just pause there for a second, just to see if there's any questions before I move on. If there's anything unclear. So if you're all good, please do give me an indication. I'm going to clear this out in the meantime when I move on. Okay, got a comment. Let me just check the no questions. All right, cool. Let's go back. All right. So that was the price relative, but sometimes you could be asked for the quantity relative. So let's take an example. Let's say they want you to work at the quantity relative for soap, right? So they're asking you for the quantity, and it's going to write short form. What is the quantity relative for soap? Okay. So before it is toothpaste, now it is soap. So we're going to look at the soap row. And remember, they're asking us for quantity. So we're not going to look at the P columns. We're going to look at the Q columns. So like I said before, the base period is in the denominator. So what is the quantity in the base period? The soap is 37. All right, so we're going to write 37 here. And then the quantity for soap in the current period is 40. 40 times 100%. And if you work this out, you'll get a value of, I believe, 108.11%. Okay, so you get a value of 108.11%. All right, and you need to interpret it now. So like I suggested, do the subtraction. So to work out the change, whatever value you get, take that value, which is 108.11%, and you subtract 100% from it, you're going to get a value of 8.11%. And so you would interpret this, okay? So I won't write it out, but I'll just say it. So remember, now we're talking about quantity. So we're going to say the quantity for soap from 2010 to 2018 has increased because you've got a positive value. And by how much? It's increased by 8.11%. All right, so now you know how to work out price relatives and quantity relatives and how to interpret it. Okay, so those are unweighted indices because you look at price or quantity in isolation. You don't look at them together. But now we're going to move on to weighted indices. So that calculation is it's a bit more, I'd say, slightly more complex, but you are rewarded for it. Okay, so obviously, if it's a bit more complex, you're going to get more marks for it. So it's important that you understand how to do it. So for the first example, you can get asked, let's take, for example, that you're asked to work out the Lascaris price index. Okay, so you need to refer to this formula in your formula sheet, and you need to work this out and then interpret it. Now we're going to come to these columns here, okay, which I told you to ignore at first, but now we need to pay attention to it. Okay, so you need to work out these columns on your side. All right, so all you need to do is you need to look at all the combinations of P's and Q's. So you will not have two different P's together, and neither will you have two different Q's together. You'll always have combinations of P's and Q's. So in the first column, and there is no specific order to it, it really is up to you. Okay. In this column, what I've done is I've looked at P1 Q0. But if you looked at P1 Q1, that's perfectly fine. Okay, but all in all, you still need to have 4 columns, and you need to cover all those combinations. All right, so P1 Q0, what that means is it's when you see the heading as P1 Q0, all that means it's P1 times Q0. That's what it is. So that's what we're doing in this column. We're going to take all the P1 values, going down, and then we're going to multiply each of them by each of the Q0 values. So there's your P1 column here. All right, and it's here. Where's your Q0? It's here. Okay, it's here. So let me see the different colors that draws your attention to that. Just give me a second. We'll go with green. So P0 is sorry, it's P1, my bad. That's P1. Yeah, P1. Okay, and then Q0. So we're going to look at these two columns to get this column. Okay, because that's what the heading is, P1 Q0. So we multiply each of these row values together. So the first calculation is 37 times 2.1, and then you're going to get a value of 77.7. So the next row, so it's 24 times 15.95, and you're going to get 382.8. And lastly, it'll be 14 times 6.74, and it gives you a value of 94.36. And then lastly, just like how we did before, total that column. So add up all these values, 1, 2, 3, going down, add them up, get the total, and right here. Okay, so before I move on, does everyone understand that step to get this column? Does everyone follow me how we got this column, how to work it out? Okay, thanks, Adrian. But please do let me know if something wasn't clear, okay? All right, so let's go back. Now we'll do the same thing, but now we're looking at a different combination of P and Q. We're going to do P not Q not. Like I said, it's really up to you how the order you want to do it. But all in all, you must have all 4 pairs. So now it's P not Q not. So we'll just do this one more column so you kind of get the gist for it. All right, so P not, question, I think. Sorry, I am a little lost. I joined late. Okay. All right, sure. No problem. All right. So I'll try and yeah, go a bit more detail so you maybe can catch up. But if not, please watch the recording. And if there's any questions, do let me know. All right. So in this column, now we need to get the P naught Q naught value. So it's going to be P naught times Q naught. All right. So the two columns we're now going to look at is P naught, which is here, and your Q naught, which is here. We're going to multiply these values, and then we get this column. Right? We get each of these values. So it's, remember, it's going to be 1.95 times 37. It's going to give you 72.15, and so on and so on. And lastly, you get the total. All right. So you're going to do that for these 4 different arrangements of it. Okay. With 4 different arrangements of P's and Q's. And we did all of that because we need these totals. These values that I circled in green, they're important, okay? Because to work out the Lasperis or the Posh indices, you need those values, all right? And this is a systematic way to do it, okay? Because when you work out the Lasperis, for instance, if they ask you to work that out, it's simply just pulling these values into the equation, all right? So I'm going to change my color back to blue. Yeah. All right. So Lasperis price index. This formula is given to you, so you're not expected to memorize it. Okay. This is the formula that's given to you. Now the reason why I told you to total them is because each of these green values, these values in the green circle, that is a summation because you summed up all the values for P1 Q0. So this value that you see here, this value that you worked out is sum sigma of P1 Q0. Right? Similarly, this value here, this is sum of P naught Q1. All right, with me. So now you can see that this equation, if you look at the numerator, it's asking for the summation, let's look at the top, of P1 Q naught. So that's this. There it is, the same thing. So the numerator for this equation is going to be this value. Okay, it's going to be 554.86. Now, what is the denominator? Now we move on to the denominator. It's in this table. I'd like for someone to give it a try and tell me what that denominator is. Looking at all these values here that are encircled in green, which is the denominator? The denominator is sum P naught Q naught. Excellent. Well done, everyone. Very good. See, so it makes your life easier. Now you just have to pull the value. So as you said, it's 511.81. It's this value. So we're going to write that here, 511.81. And then all we're doing is just following this formula to the T. So now you multiply by 100%. So you put this in brackets. I like doing that, 100%. And if you work this out, you'll get a value of let me see, hold on. 108.41%. 108.41%. All right, you've done most of the hard work here. All right, now we need to interpret this just like before. So, like I said before, the first step to interpret is work out the change. I like to subtract 100, but it's up to you. So I'll take the value we got, which is 108.41% minus 100%. Right, and that gives you 8.41%. Right, it's a positive value, so we know it increased. Now the interpretation for these Lasperis and Posh weighted indices, they're a bit tricky. So I'm just gonna want you to follow me as I explain this, okay? So there's a couple of things I need to draw your attention to in these formulas. All right. Now remember on it's an unweighted index, we look at price or quantity in isolation. Excuse me. But in this case, we are working with a weighted index because you can see from the formula, there's price and quantity in this formula. So we're taking both into account. But if you look at this formula, I want to draw your attention to the equation that you see here. for the Lasperus price index. You'll see that because we're working out the price index, the price has to be different because you're working out how the price has changed. So you have to vary the price. You will never have the same price in the numerator and the denominator. That's why you have P1 on the top and you have Q0 because it's the price index. You're trying to figure out how price has changed. However, while you're trying to figure out how price has changed, you need to use one of the quantities because it's a weighted index. Which quantity you use is given to you in the formula. So if you look at the Lasperus index, the Q is Q0 in the top and it's Q0 in the bottom. So it's the same quantity both in the numerator and the denominator. And like I told you earlier, the zeros are the base period. In other words, if you look at our table, the 0 is the 2010. And when it's a 1, okay, 18. I'll be there in a second. Do we have to indicate if the answer has a plus or a minus at any point in the module? Sorry, I assume you mean this answer here that you're talking about, the change. Because this can either be plus or minus. And if so, you don't really have to indicate whether it's a negative or positive. But what is important is that you need to know whether it's an increase or decrease, and you need to interpret it as being either an increase or decrease. So in our case, it's a positive value, so I know it's an increase. You can skip the step and just say that the price has increased by 8.41%. But it's really up to you if you want to. I'm going to put the step here in a box, right? So this is optional to work out the change. It really is up to you. All you need to keep in mind is when that difference is a negative, then it indicates it's a decrease. When it's positive, it means it's an increase. No worries. All right. So remember what I said. Going back to this equation, what we've done here in this Lasperus price equation is you've kept the quantity in the base here constant because it's 0, because you have Q0 on the top and Q0 on the bottom. So this is kept constant. All right. So how are you going to interpret this? Okay. And in your interpretation, I'm going to write this in text. Okay. All right. All right. So how you're going to start off with is you've worked out the increase, right? It was 8.41%. And you're working out the Lasperus price index. So you can start off by saying from 2010, that's where we start from 2010 to 2018, the price, because we're working out price index, the price of toiletry items, because that's this problem, toiletry items. So the price of toiletry items has increased by 8.41%. And now this is the part that you need to add in. And this is why I mentioned that whole thing about Q0 being in the top and the bottom. You need to say what's being kept constant. So you're working on the price index. So you need to say while keeping, oops, let me try and make the bar bigger. While keeping QT1, right? The short form, but you get the point. While keeping the quantity in. Now, don't say Q0 or don't say naught or base years. Say what that base year is. We wrote that here. The base year is 2010. So you will say in 2010 constant. That's how you interpret this. Okay. Make sure you understand that. So you need to pay attention to what is being kept constant in that equation, right? It's really up to you if you want to memorize that Lasperus, we always keep base period constant, and Posh, we keep the current period constant. Or if you're able to make sense of the equation, you don't need to memorize it because you can see it in the equation. All right, so that's going to be left to you how you want to do it, but either way, you still need to add in that last part of your interpretation. You need to say what you're keeping constant and when. All right, okay, so let's do two more. Let's get the board. Okay, is that clear though? What I've explained about the interpretation? Does everyone understand that? All good? I'll check that in a second. Okay. Oops, the pen. All good. Okay, fantastic. Okay, now let's say the question asks for the Posh price index. So now the question says calculate the Posh price index and interpret it. Right, so now we're going to be dealing with the Posh price index. Posh. I think it's actually pronounced Poshe, but just please forgive my pronunciation. Price index. All right. So now we're going to follow the formula for the Posh price index. So I'm going to put this in a different color so we don't get confused with last press. All right. So here now we're dealing with Posh price index. So if you look at the formula here, now if you look at the numerator, it's the sum of P1, Q1. So from our table, you've done all the totals. So here's the numerator. This is your sum, P1, Q1. All right. And then the denominator is P0, Q1. So that's this P0, Q1. That's the denominator, sum P0, Q1. So the value is going to be the numerator, which is 478.94, 478.94. All I'm doing is I'm following this formula, right? Over the denominator, which is 442.34. 442.34. I like to bracket it, and then you multiply by 100% times 100%. All right, if you work that out, you get a value of 108.27. It's pretty similar to what we had in the previous problem, but not exact. 108.27. There are times where they can be the same, but not always. I just keep a note of that. So now we worked it out. It's 108.27, and we need to interpret it. Okay, so this comes back to your question, Atari. Do you need to do the step show the positive or negative? You don't. It's up to you. I prefer to do it, and I'll show you in the next example. One more example after this. I'm going to do an example where the value is actually less than 100. All right. All right. So now we'll work out the change. The change is equal to 108.27% minus 100%. Then the value you get is 8.27%. 8.27%. All right, now it's time to interpret. Okay, so we got a positive value. We know it increased, so let's get ready to write out the explanation. Now, just like before, the price has changed because we're working at the price index, but we need to indicate which quantity is kept constant. So we're going to say the price of toiletry items. Always say from when to when. Okay, don't say from base year to current year. You need to say what that base year is. The base year is 2010, so 2010 to 2018 increased by 8.27%. Right, and we need to stipulate what are we keeping constant. Okay, so if you look at the equation, right, while we need to be saying what quantity are we keeping constant. Look at the equation for the Posh price index. Which quantity do you think is being kept constant? Give it a shot. Keeping the quantity in which year? Constant. Very good. Very good. It's 2018. You know, if you see that, because if you look at the equation for the Posh price index, it's Q1. Right? Remember I told you 1 represents 2018. So we would say, yeah, in 2018. All right. And that's how you will fully answer this question. Okay. I'm going to do one more. But before I finish up with this last one, are there any questions? Was everyone all good? Silence, I take it as there's no questions. Okay, just hang in there. I know it's late. This is the last one. And I'm doing this question because it's possible that it could be asked, okay, in your exam or your assignment. So I want to ensure that you understand this. Okay, so sometimes you can get asked. Let's take an example. So far, if you look at these equations that we have here, we have the Lasperus price index, and we have the the Parsh price index, and the Lasperus price index. But we're not given the Lasperus quantity index. That's not in your formula sheet. But you could get asked that. It is a possibility. So the question could say, what is the Lasperus quantity index? I'm just going to QTY for quantity index. Right. Now you need to write the formula down. Okay, so don't feel intimidated by this. If you just keep the principles that I mentioned earlier in mind, you'll be fine. All right, so now we're working with the Lasperus quantity index, but that formula is not given, so we need to write that formula out. Now, if I draw your attention to the Lasperus price index, I told you earlier that if you are working out the price index, the price has to be different because you're working out the change in price. So the p-value you have in the numerator must be different to the p-value in the denominator. All right, so that's when you're working out the price index. But now, however, we're being asked for the quantity index. So that means the q in the numerator and the denominator needs to be different. And we always look at how it has changed from the base period going to the current period. So we'll always have the base period in the denominator. So the q that we're going to have in the bottom is the base period q, so it's q naught. Okay, and then the top is going to be q1. All right, everyone. Because we're working on the quantity index, quantity has to vary. So you need to have q1 on the top, q naught on the bottom. Now we need to decide which p are we using. All right, now remember what I told you earlier, that Lasperus, okay, keeps the base period constant. And if you just look at the price index, just look at this price index for Lasperus. Okay, just look here. For the price index, you have to keep the quantity constant. But which quantity have you kept constant? You've kept q naught constant, so 0. 0 is what's kept constant for Lasperus. For Parsh, you can see that 1 is kept constant for q. So Lasperus keeps the base period constant, and that's what we're going to use for price. We're going to use the base price. We're going to use p naught. P naught here, and then we're going to have p naught here. Okay, so for quantity index, your price will be kept constant. Which one? Well, for Lasperus, it's p naught, and that's what they have for both. This is the equation. Multiply this by 100%. All you're doing is you're just following the rest of the formula for all weighted indices. All right, and that's your formula. And then, as you can see, these values, you did all the hard work. You have it in your table. This numerator is p naught q1, and that is p naught q1. There you go. It's there. It's 442.34. The denominator is p naught q naught, and that is here. That's the denominator, p naught q naught, and that's here. Okay, so you'll substitute these values. You'll work it out. I'll work it out for you. I'll just give you the answer. The value that you're going to get is 86.43%. 86.43%. Now, this is why I recommend doing that subtraction to see the change, because for me, I can't tell exactly what it's changed by. My brain doesn't work that way. Okay, so if you can see it, it's somewhere around 13 point something percent, but you need to be exact. You can't just say around 30%. So what I do is I take the value that I got, which is 86. I'm working out the change now. So 86.43% minus 100%. Oops, so I'm putting division for that. Oops, minus 100%. And if you work this out, you're going to get the negative. Tariq, as you asked earlier. So you're going to get negative 13.57%. And 57%. So you're not, as I said, you're not marked for this. You do this just to help you in your interpretation. So it really is left to you. So we know it's a decrease because it's a negative value. So now I'm going to interpret it. Lastly, let's do the interpretation. Right. Okay. We're going to remember now we've worked out the quantity index. So we're going to say how the quantity has changed from the base period to the current period. So the quantity from the base period, which is 2010, I will take quantity of toiletry items, just to be specific. Toiletry items from 2010 to 2018 has decreased, okay, because we've got a relative value. And how much has it decreased by? And that's 13.57%. All right. And then lastly, what have we kept constant? And that's where you need to look at your equation. Where's the stuff? There you go. My big tear. All right. While, sorry, 1 second. While keeping, remember we talking about how the quantity has changed, so that means now we have kept the price constant. Which price have we kept constant? Let's look at the equation. Look at which p is the same on the top and the bottom. We're keeping the price in what year? Anyone want to give it a shot? Just look at the equation. Good. Very good. Excellent. Fantastic. All right. Okay. Does that make sense? That's how you'd interpret it. Full marks. And that is index numbers from my side. Everyone, I hope this made sense to you. Let's pause there. Everyone all good? Everyone good? Fantastic. All right. Yes, I will make the recording available probably by tomorrow. So I'll post the link in the announcements. And remember to check your announcements on VC Learn. The question is the extent of learning is 2, or are there other material we must learn? I'm thinking you're asking me, is this the extent of learning is 2? This is pretty much what you can get asked for learning too, but don't just rely on my collab, okay? This will supplement your learning, but this has covered quite a bit of it. So make sure you understand this first, and then start looking at lecture slides, looking at the textbook, etc. But what I've covered, that's essentially it. All right. Thank you everyone for joining. Yeah, I appreciate that. And enjoy your evening. We'll chat soon.